I was younger, probably around early high school, and a friend and I were messing around with a Ouija board one night. We'd heard all the typical horror stories, but we were mostly doing it out of boredom and curiosity. To make it legit, we decided to ask each other deep, personal questions, things we knew the other person wouldn't possibly know. That way, if the board gave us real answers, we'd know something strange was going on. At some point, I asked. Now for context, I've had my stepdad in my life since I was 4, and that's the only dad my friend ever knew about. As far as she was concerned, he was my only father, so when I asked the question, it wasn't something she could have guessed or faked. The planchette started slowly moving across the board. M-A-R. I rolled my eyes and stopped right there. That wasn't even remotely close to the name I'd been told growing up. I just shrugged it off, figured the board was either random or not working. Well, fast forward 2 years. I'm older, and through a series of conversations and eventual confrontations, I found out that my mum had been lying to me about my biological father the entire time. Turns out the man I thought was my dad wasn't. My real father? A man named Martin. Yeah, M-A-R. I didn't even connect the dots until months later, when my friend and I were talking about that Ouija board session, reminiscing about how creepy some of the responses had been. Then it hit me like a punch to the gut. We both looked at each other in silence, and I swear I got full body goosebumps. The board told me before my own family did, and it's still one of the wildest, most surreal things that's ever happened to me. My aunt used to live in coal country, Pennsylvania. If you've ever heard of Centralia, you know what I mean. For over 50 years, an underground fire has been burning beneath the town, ripping through coal seams and leaving behind an eerie wasteland. Even in the winter, you can see steam hissing up from the cracked earth, like the land itself is breathing out something toxic. The fire tore through the underground caverns and even the town cemetery, and over time the population dwindled. What's left now are broken roads and abandoned homes, and just a handful of stubborn souls who refuse to leave. The place is remarkably dangerous now, because of the very real possibility that your house might be swallowed up from underneath you, and you'll be sent to a literal inferno. But Centralia isn't the scariest part of this story. My aunt and her husband lived just a few towns over, in an old house built above a massive coal dig. Back in the day, miners tunneled everywhere beneath the land, and no one ever really knew if those tunnels passed under their homes. And sometimes, without warning, the ground would just give out. Yards would sink, basements would buckle. It would always be a gamble living in that area. The house my aunt bought had a history soaked in tragedy. The man who'd lived there before had lost his wife in a horrific accident. She fell down the steep basement stairs, straight to the cold, unforgiving floor, where they used to shovel coal into the furnace to heat the house. Not long after, the husband passed away in the exact same way. He fell to his death, lying broken and alone at the bottom of the stairs, and his body wasn't discovered for days. When my aunt and her husband moved in, they didn't know this, but it didn't take long for them to realize there was something wrong. The strangeness started small. They'd be outside hanging laundry on the line, when suddenly the radio would switch stations. My aunt liked listening to low-frequency stations, smooth jazz, soft rock. But the dial would jump to high frequencies blasting country music, which she really wasn't a fan of. It was as if someone was deliberately tuning the radio to annoy her. Then the noises began. At night, after the sun went down, the house would come alive. creaking and groaning. It wasn't just the sound of an old house settling. Doors would slam shut by themselves, almost violently, when no one was near them. Footsteps would echo through the halls, but when they checked to see if there could be an intruder, there never was. It was the basement, though. That was the worst, the main offender. Every time they went down there, whether to store something or clean up, the activity would spike. The air felt heavier down there. My aunt said she always had the unnerving sensation of being watched, and the more they made changes to the house, the worse it seemed to get. One night, after weeks of escalating disturbances, my aunt finally snapped. She had reached her breaking point. She sat down with her husband, and they came up with an idea that was as desperate as it was strange. They decided to talk to the spirit. They went down into the basement, right to the bottom of those cursed stairs, and spoke out loud to the man who had died there. They begged and pleaded for peace. My aunt told him that they wouldn't make any more changes to the house for a few months if he would just leave them alone. She swears she felt the air shift after that. And for a while, things actually got better. For about 7 or 8 months, the house was quiet. There were no footsteps, no slamming doors, and the radio stayed on the station it was supposed to. But it was temporary. Years later, after they sold the house and moved away, the new owners had a different experience. The house collapsed. It caved in right around the area where the man had died at the bottom of those stairs. Some people blamed the old coal tunnels beneath the house, saying the ground had finally given out. But my aunt doesn't think it was the earth shifting. She thinks it was him. Maybe he finally took the house with him. Either way, the house is gone now. But sometimes when I think about it, I wonder, was it the weight of the coal mines that caused the collapse? Or the spirit of the man who couldn't bear to see his house changed? What do you think? The place I work is an old 3-story house in the downtown area of a city in Mississippi. I'm not sure when it was built, but it was added into over multiple occasions throughout the years. It was a private home, a restaurant, a law office, and maybe other businesses that I'm not aware of. And since 2014, it's been the main office for my job. In general, it's an old building that makes old buildings sound from time to time. For a long time, I was often the first person here, and among the last to leave, and have heard what sounded distinctly like voices upstairs when I knew for a fact no one else was there, and others have reported similar sounds. One evening in September of 2015, Toys R Us held a Force Friday event for the release of new toys and merch for Star Wars The Force Awakens. 2 workers, David and Ronnie, decided to meet at the office after work and ride together to the event. I forget exactly what time the event started, but it was late enough that we all went our separate ways and ate dinner before meeting back at the office. I was the first to arrive back at the office. I pulled up and parked in the front lot, and noticed Ronnie, who lived close enough at the time that he walked to and from the office rather than driving, so the lack of his vehicle there wasn't unusual, was walking up the front steps, and I assumed he went to the office. I did notice that he was wearing different clothes that he'd worn that day, but didn't think much of it. I got out of my car and headed in to wait with him until David and his wife arrived. When I got to the door, though, it was locked. I thought Ronnie had just locked it behind him as a joke. I didn't have a key to the front door, so I knocked, but Ronnie never appeared. I decided to return to my car, and when I did, I looked and saw Ronnie walking up the sidewalk from his apartment, wearing the clothes he'd been wearing at work that day. I decided not to say anything. but I guess I was noticeably uneasy because he asked me what was up. As I was explaining what I saw, David and his wife arrived, so I told them too. We did a search of the area. Our office is fenced around two sides, so we split up thinking that maybe someone had gone around the building. They wouldn't have gone anywhere if we had headed them off from both sides, and we did, and we met in the back, none of us having seen anyone. We kind of shrugged it off, or they did since they hadn't seen anything themselves. But it still bothered me. Months later, the event wasn't fresh in my mind at all anymore, and I got to work early on a Monday morning, and did my usual round of turning on the lights, unlocking the front door from the inside before heading back to make coffee. I noticed Ronnie was standing over by the copier facing away from me, assuming he must have come in while I was going around turning on the lights, because I had shut off the security system when I entered, so no one had beaten me there. I said, "Morning," and continued walking to the kitchen. He didn't reply, so I assumed he hadn't heard me. Later that day, not having really thought about it again, I asked Ronnie's wife, who also works with us, where he was because I needed his input on a project. She told me that he was home sick. I asked what was wrong because he seemed fine this morning. She said he hadn't been there at all, and that he'd been sick all weekend. Another year or two later, a similar incident happened. I got to work early, and after I had made coffee, I saw Ronnie walking up the steps to the second floor. But then a few minutes later, he and his wife arrived to work, and he was wearing entirely different clothes. I had told a few people at work about the incident, but they all just considered it a good spooky story to share around Halloween time. Until earlier this year. Until then, I was the only one who had seen the thing we dubbed as the other Ronnie, or at least the only one to share a story of it. But then one day our project manager Wade saw it. He isn't exactly a no-nonsense kind of guy, but he isn't the type of person who would just start to make stuff up. He had left something upstairs when he left to go home, so he came back. When he got to the office, it was after everyone had gone and locked up. He went to grab whatever it was he had left and noticed Ronnie was sitting at the desk upstairs facing the computer. "Hey," he said, but never got a reply, then went to the restroom. When he came back out, he noticed Ronnie was gone, though the door had never made the ding sound it makes when it opens. I haven't seen the other Ronnie since then, but I do occasionally think about it and keep an eye open for it. A few things to note. Other Ronnie is always wearing jeans, which Ronnie often but not always wears. It's always been facing away. Neither Wade or I saw the face, but it just overall looks like the same build and size. It never speaks or seems to really do anything. The only time there's ever been any motion from the other Ronnie was when I saw him walk up the front steps that first time. I'm curious if anyone has any idea what this could be, or if you've experienced anything similar. After my father passed away, something happened that my mother still doesn't like to talk about. It was an ordinary afternoon. She was walking through the living room, the sunlight spilling in through the window like it always did. And there he was, sitting on the couch, legs crossed, calm as ever. He was wearing one of his favorite shirts, the kind he used to wear before he got sick. He looked whole and healthy, like himself again. He met her eyes, gave her this little smile, half amused, half tender. The way he used to, when he knew something you didn't. He wasn't a mist, or a shadow, or some shimmering outline. He wasn't see-through, and he wasn't glowing. He looked completely solid, like in life. But my mother was terrified of ghosts, always has been. So instead of comfort, all she felt was panic. She blurted out, "What are you doing here? You don't belong here." She turned away for a split second, and when she looked back, he was gone. Couch empty, like he'd never been there. Years went by. That afternoon became something we only talked about in hushed whispers, if at all. Until one night it happened to me. I'd fallen asleep in the recliner in the living room. I stirred a little because I had to use the restroom, but I didn't get up. That's when I felt it. Someone climbed on top of me, gently, and rested their head on my shoulder. It wasn't scary. It wasn't even surprising. It felt familiar. Without thinking, I wrapped my arms around them and hugged back. I could feel the shape of a man's back, the fabric of an undershirt beneath my hands, the weight, the warmth, the scent. Every part of me told me exactly who it was. It was my dad. That hug felt exactly the same way it used to when he was alive. In those final years, all he wore were undershirts and pajama pants. And in that moment, there was no question that it was him. And then I fully woke up. The recliner was empty though. But that feeling stayed deep within me, and I carried it for days. Not with fear, but with peace. I don't expect anyone to believe me, but I know what I felt, and I know what my mum saw. And I truly believe there is something after this life. My first spook was sometime in my high chair era. My high chair looked down the hallway on my grandparents' trailer, where my parents lived at the time. I remember crying for my older sister, who was only 4 years older, so maybe 5 or 6 at the time, because she would smile as she fed me. My mom always had a tension that made me feel scared, but of course it was from my addict dad. I remember eating applesauce, specifically with bananas, because once I